So now I would like to begin the program, and we're going to start with David Shultz in our Master Modeler series, Resin Casting in a 3D World, 3D Printing World. Thank you, David. I put the arm on you at short notice, and I appreciate you coming through.
Yeah, I've done a couple of these programs at shows, done clinics at shows and stuff, and it's always uh, it's always been well received. So anyway, we'll start off. I've always been a scratch builder. I'm huge in scratch building. When 3D printing came out, I feared it would be the end of scratch building because it just 3D printing is so superior. But I am not a tech guy. I barely can run a computer, let alone program one to 3D print. So I continue to scratch build, and but there are certain things I just can't make, and this is one of them. This is a luggage rack. The Northern Pacific, which I model, use this style of rack, and I mean, I could solder wires together in the whole bit, but that'd take hours. And 3D printing, it just they just whip this stuff out. So it does have its advantages. Here's another little item. A Waukesha ice engine. I use quite a few of these on my models. The only problem is that it's all open because it's got a fan on the end. It's got screens. I can't really add any weight to this, and I like to have my cars weighted down a little bit. I have roller bearings in my trucks. So if a car weighs 3 or 4 pounds, that works out really well. Well, I find that if I scratch build stuff and make it solid, it adds a little weight to the car, and my cars will end up around 3 to 4 pounds. So I enjoy building. The other thing is I can't, like I say, I can't program a computer, but I can make parts and fit them in my cars and make sure they work. And where I've started making molds of stuff is the Northern Pacific bought a lot of Pullman cars. And so when you make your duplex sleepers and your 10-6 sleepers, you've got roomettes, you've got folding hoppers, you've got fold-up beds, and I can make one model very well detailed, and then make a mold, and then I can just punch out as many as the items as I need. So anyway, if we start the slideshow, I can show you some of what I'm talking about here. Hey, that's me. Anyway, here's some of my molds I've made. In the upper right-hand corner, there is a bolster piece that my son designed overland on the Little Joes. The frame is just a little bit weak, and so my son designed this part to go on Little Joe's to stiffen the frame up, and then you can see where the bolster is, where the lead truck mounts to, and it works very well. It fits in there, it stiffens up that frame and works really well. Well, he designed one, and I made a mold of it, and now I can punch out however many of those he needs. Below that is my sinks. I needed corner sinks, and I needed regular sinks. And a lot of railroads didn't cover up the plumbing. They left it exposed. Well, the NP had a lot of their plumbing inside of a cabinet to hide all the water lines and such. So I needed some sinks. So I modified a piece and added the bottom cabinet. So now when I need sinks and corner sinks, I even that little slot up above there is a dental bowl. So I can cast all those parts. Next to it, I built CNW commuter cars, and I designed the staircase to go from the lower level to the upper level. And you can see there's 4 of them there. I had one side go bad on me. The rubber will eventually give out. I keep all my masters so I can make another mold, but I just put an X by it here, and I've got the others marked rights and lefts. And then the top one there is a modified end for Milwaukee Road. As you can see, the port window that's in there. So these are just some of the molds. I've got a bin full of molds that I've made over the years, but these are just some of them. You get a good idea of what's going on. Next slide, please. Here are some of the masters that I've made. And once again, you can see I've got some sofas. There's a corner sofa up there. That big round one, that fits in a Milwaukee Road Skytop lounge. We had photographs of the sofa, so we scratch built the one part. And my son builds these skytop lounges, and they turn out absolutely gorgeous. And he's got people demanding that they build theirs, build theirs for them. And so he includes the sofa. So once again, I can just pour a sofa. Below that are some of the folding hoppers. You can see one is open to expose the toilet. The one next to it is the lid is open to expose the sink, and then the others are folded up. One of the corner sinks there. There's one of the ends. That's the end we designed for Milwaukee Road. And then over to the left is one of the ends to the Chicago Northwestern commuter cars, the bi-levels. I needed an end that extended up to match the car. And so I designed one end that looks really good, fits really well. And then I just made a casting of that. And then next to it are the masters of the staircases, one in the middle of the car, and then the two that go up to the upper levels, the bi-level. And then you can see the master of the Little Joe. And next to it is a Waukesha generator set that I've never seen one in the modeling world in O scale. And so my son designed and built that, and I made a mold of that piece. And then right up above there is a drop step. None of the pasture cars that I made in the past had drop steps to them. It was just kind of hollow under there. So I designed and built that piece to fit up under the pasture cars, and now I add them to every car I make. Next slide. So we're going to make a mold of these two. My son designed a little seat there with the armrests in it. And next to it is a refrigerator freezer that I made. And I'm going to need a bunch of these because I'm building lots of cars with refrigerators and sinks and kitchens. And so we're going to need some of this stuff. So we'll go ahead and make a mold. Next slide. Oh, we skipped. Anyway, that's yeah. I've got a whole bunch of scrap plastic I've got piled up, so I kind of choose which size I want to build. So I set these two here. This is a little large, and this rubber is not cheap anymore. So now what I do is I'll fit them in an area that's just the right size. This was a little big, so it was going to burn up a lot of rubber. So I decided to go with something a little bit smaller, which I think is the next slide. Yep, there's the piece I decided to use. And then you can see one of the dams that I've got up on there. What I do is I line it up with the edge on the one side, and then it runs off the edge. And if you go to the next slide, you can see I'm building. Oh, no, skip those two. But anyway, you build it. I think there's another picture of this. Anyway, go to the next slide there. There we go. You can see now all the dams are in place. So the parts are down in the bottom, and I always glue the part that doesn't matter, because all of the stuff I make, I don't need a two-part mold. I can do it with a single mold because everything glues up against a wall or to the floor of the pasture car or whatever. So I can build them this way. I've only built one two-part mold. It turned out pretty well, but I try to make it simple. Anyway, what you got to do after you get your dams up, yeah, there they are down inside there, is you've got to measure the area so you don't mix too much rubber. So of course you can see here it's about 2.5, and the mold ended up being 2.5 by 2.25, and I wanted the rubber to be about 3/4 of an inch thick. So when you multiply that all together, it comes up to 4.21 cubic inches. Well, of course, I'm still dealing with inches. I'm one of those people, but I do have a converter on my phone, so I can convert it to milliliters because every piece of science equipment I've got is in milliliters. So I convert it over, and to milliliters, it's 68.9 milliliters. So next slide. So before we pour the rubber, we want to spray some kind of mold release in there so that the rubber will let go easily. So that's a can of stuff that I have that I've heard people use PAM. I've never tried that. I buy this stuff, and it just takes a little bit of a spray to do it. You can see I'm doing it inside my paint booth because I really don't want to breathe that junk in. So next slide. So I mixed up the rubber. I got 68.9 milliliters of the stuff, and you slowly start to pour it in. If you pour it in too fast, you'll get trapped air bubbles in there. Now these new rubbers that they've come up, they're really good about they stay loose and long enough for the air bubbles to kind of drift to the surface. But I still like to pour it nice and slow to allow any trapped air to get out. And but you just keep pouring nice and slow. You've got plenty of time because a lot of these rubbers take 7 to 8 hours to set up completely. So you just pour it in nice and slow. Next slide. And then when the well, okay, my pictures are jumping around a little bit, but anyway, you fill that mold up and you set that aside for a few hours. Well, anyway, here's some of the parts that I poured the resin into the rubber mold, and you can see the that bolster piece and then the ends of my C&W cars. And these rubber molds hold up pretty well. I've probably made 20 parts in these things so far, and the rubber is still in really good shape. The blue stuff is the stuff I buy from Micromark, which is a pretty good rubber for thinner. It's very flexible, but I have torn some of the molds, in the corners and such. But it doesn't make them. You can still use them. You set them down, and the torn area fills in. And if the resin does seep into the crack, it's just a simple matter of sanding it off. So anyway, next slide. Oh, that's where it ends. Okay, we'll end it there. But I do have I brought the piece with me. I poured this this afternoon. I made this rubber mold for the fridge and the step. So all we got to do is just kind of bend it to loosen the parts up, and then you can just kind of push from the bottom, and boing, out pops the seat that my son made with the armrests. And then my little refrigerator, and out it comes. And here's the refrigerator. Now, the first couple ones that come out have little dirt spots and such on them, and that'll clean up after a while, but you wash these and paint them, and you'd never know they were there. The other thing I like to do is if I want heavier parts, I can add a little lead shot to the resin. And once you paint it, you'll never see the lead shot in there, but you can weight down the parts by doing that method. And you can buy lead shot in many different sizes and such. But anyway, that's kind of my presentation on making rubber molds and such. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Lay them on me.
If I could call on Greg, and I had a discussion this afternoon about what would be some instances that you'd want to do a resin casting instead of perhaps chugging it out and doing a CAD drawing and doing a 3D print. Greg, maybe a quick comment on that?
Yeah, to me, it seems like 3D printing and casting parts are really two separate items. And 3D printing has its place, and it's a glorious place. And we all are happy that it's with us. But there is no way that it will replace casting parts, in my opinion, because there's too often that you have something that for some reason or another you need more of. It could be something that you need 10 of, and it's easy to build one and then cast 9 more. Or it's something that you have that you got 20 years ago before 3D printing was around, and you need 4 of them now, or 8 of them or something. The uses that you were talking about, David, where you're going to need all these sinks in all your cars and stuff like that. There's no reason that you can't have that just because you don't do 3D printing. Casting and resin, for a variety of reasons, is just one of the other tools that we have. And I appreciate you showing how easy it is. I've done it a couple times back in the 90s when I needed some stuff, and I don't have any of the materials that I had left over from then, and I doubt I would remember how I did it, but it's nice to be reminded. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it's like I say, I've built the parts, and I like adding, now, like you say, 3D printing, you're never gonna, the stuff they can produce on 3D printing is just incredible. But what I really like is, I'll build a part and make sure it fits in the car the way I want. Now, if you follow everything and reduce it down to a 1/4 inch, it's going to fit, so if you do it right on a 3D printer. But like I say, I don't have the mindset or the equipment to 3D print. I've got friends. I can, the luggage racks I showed you in that Waukesha ice engine, Dan Doughty printed that for me, and it turned out absolutely gorgeous. But I like building solid pieces too, because I can sand them down in a true sander, make them absolutely square, and it helps hold the car, because the sides maybe will warp in a little bit or something. Well, you can glue these pieces down, and they're solid enough that they're actually going to offer some stability to the car sides.
And
Where
you
with the
can't
3D,
discount, yeah, you can't discount the hobby market, the modelers, the modeling community that makes kits using resin casting.
Yeah.
I
That's what I
put
was.
together 3 buildings that were resin cast, including an O-scale Pennsylvania tower. And you know, it's a substantial building because those were really heavy resin castings. And while you might have been able to do something like that in 3D printing, it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
And you look at a number of the cars that you can get resin castings that you put together, and that allows for production of a car that wouldn't have enough draw that a mainstream manufacturer is going to make it.
Yeah. The ones I also enjoy, I've got a friend who makes buildings, brick buildings, and he'll make rubber molds and then pour hydrocal plaster in the rubber mold. That sets up, and of course you're popping out building parts left and right. So yeah, it's got its advantages, it's got its disadvantages, but I do a lot of the casting stuff, and I've got a son who builds a lot of great stuff, and then he brings it over here. Dad, make a rubber mold of this. So
Yeah, I think like Frenchman River Model Works picking up the Thomas York line, and then they have their own line of resin buildings. It would be quite a task to draw one of those, like the M. Spillane building that I built on their behalf, and
yeah,
would be quite a lot to draw in CAD and get the nuances that you could by hand carving a blank and then creating a mold and then resin casting. So I guess the point is everybody recognizes 3D filament and resin printing have their place, but so does, this is the resin casting still has a place in model railroading is the moral of the story. Yeah.
I agree.
David, this is Steve Sherrill. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You said that in order to get additional weight, you would put lead BBs in there.
Yep. I pour it in before I pour the resin.
Right. And you said your cars weigh between 3 and 4 pounds.
That's correct.
Now, I know that you probably use sprung trucks for sure, right?
I do use, I'm doing Proto 48. And of course, I had a program once about how you've got to keep constant wheel contact to, so of course they're sprung and they have roller bearings in them. So they don't pull like a friction journal. They actually roll pretty nice. And most passenger trains, 8 to 10 cars, 17 at the absolute max. So because they're overweighted like that, it's generally not a problem.
Can you see the springs compressed just like in the prototype?
Oh yeah, yeah. I build a lot of the old Chemtron outside swing hanger, the 41 Kudo. I build a lot of those, and I'll remove those springs. And I found new springs through outfit out of Kentucky. I think it's called Jones Springs. And I called them, and they were very helpful. I told them what I was doing, and I gave them the dimensions of the spring, what I needed. And they were able to tell me, okay, what do the cars weigh? Well, they weigh 3 to 4 pounds. So you need a 1 pound spring because there's 4 on each truck. So she said, I think a 1 pound spring is going to work for you really well. And I got these springs, and they're like 2 feet long when you buy them. And I thought they were going to be short, so you have to cut them with a Dremel, but gosh, they're just perfect. When you set the car down, it compresses the springs, and those trucks operate just like the real McCoy. It takes a little bit of work. You got to, loosen up those pedestals a little bit so the journals slide in and out of there real nice. But you get those trucks filed down and get those new springs in there. Like I say, you set the car down and you see the springs compress. And then when they're running around, you can actually see the wheels drop down and pick up again. And the springs keeping the tension on those axles at all times.
Wow, that's very interesting. I'd like to see that sometime.
Well, maybe in my next presentation, I'll show you how I build those Chemtron trucks and get them to operate correctly.
Well, thank you again, David. Appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
David, before you go, this is Phil. So I have a question. So I did some resin casting, and I had huge issues with bubbles in the resin when you cast it.
Sure.
And I have a vacuum sealer that's a chamber vacuum sealer. I ended up putting them in the chamber vacuum sealer, bringing down a little bit of vacuum, and that seemed to suck some of the bubbles out more.
Sure.
What techniques have you come up with to remove those surface bubbles you get in the bottom? Or do you find the mold release helps with that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the mold release helps, but the new resins they have now, I buy a lot of my resins from Reynolds out of Chicago, I believe it is, and they have got trying to remember what they call it. I've got the order sheets, but anyway, it's the kind of resin you stir it up and you pour it in a thin stream. Once again, you don't pour it real fast, although you've got about 7 to 10 minutes to get this poured. So you don't want to do a lot of pouring. You want to try and get it poured as quick as possible. But I have not had issues with air bubbles in these things. The air rises out of it real quickly. If you pour a nice slow stream, I don't have much of an issue with air bubbles. So these new resins they've come up with doesn't really require any kind of vacuum or pressure to get the air bubbles out of it. So it's kind of amazing stuff. When the first time I started doing this, some of the resins they had, I was struggling with the air bubbles too. But nowadays, I mean, this one here, you can see no vacuum, and it's just a solid block of resin. Kind of amazing. They've also got one they call like a soft white. They've got many different resins, but you can kind of read each of the properties and it'll tell you, this one turns white, this one turns, brown. But no, air bubbles are no longer a problem with these new resins they've come up with.
Good.
David, when you sand that, do you wear a mask?
The parts themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I've got one of those hand cranked sanders I bought from that outfit out of Canada, and I don't find that the dust floats in the air.
Okay.
So it's pretty stable that way too.
Okay.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
You hit on part of the question I have, that there are many resins. Is there any one better than the other, or specifically for the one that does it all for everything?
Well, this one that I ordered, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's number 320. If you go on Reynolds' site, they've got a great website. You can look around and see the different resins they offer. Now, I'm just experimenting. I ordered this one, and it works really well, but I want to experiment with some of the other resins they have. Some of them. The one thing I ran into trouble with one, it's set up in like 30 seconds. And I didn't realize that when I did it. And of course, you're stirring it, and all of a sudden the stick gets stuck. So that one is almost useless. But so you got to read about the resin to see how much of a working time you've got with the stuff. Some of it, you've got 30 minutes. Some of it, 2 minutes, 4 minutes. Now the faster they set up, the hotter they get. But these rubbers are pretty good at holding up to the heat, so it's not a problem. They even make a silicone rubber in there that you can pour, like lead and stuff in. You can go up to like 500 degrees without melting the rubber, which I find phenomenal. So if you wanted to make your parts out of lead or some of that, what do they call that, Templo, that you can pour in, you can melt the metal with boiling water, but the rubber will put up with that heat, but.
You don't want to.
But no, I'll have to get back to you on that, because I'm, like I say, the next a bunch of rubber or a bunch of resin I buy, I'm going to try a different variety and see what I think of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, thank you, David. Great presentation.
You are more than welcome.
By the way, although I'm not an expert, if you do want to pour metal, Micromark has some low temperature metal alloys that contain no lead. You really don't.
Okay.
You don't want to. It's okay to throw lead shot or BBs into something, but you don't want to melt lead. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and that was terrific.